Hello everyone and welcome to Green Magic. This will be card draw 7 out of 10. This one is for Death Draw. So basically whenever something dies you get to draw a card. Whether it be the creature itself has it stapled onto it, when this creature dies you draw a card, or some other effect. These are not things that can self-sacrifice for the most part, so that will be in a later video. The two basic things that I think the cards in this video will want to do is either it will want to die, so you would have other sacrifice effects and other synergies and other death-based triggers in your deck, or it's just a big creature that you don't want to die, and you can kind of use the fact that you will get value if it does die to kind of deter your opponents from wanting to kill it, board wipe it, whatever. So there's a few different commanders that I think really want to play this style, and I think that you could probably see a lot of the cards later on this list in like a Crush the Blood Braided deck. 5 mana, including black, red, green, 3/3 human warrior. Whenever another creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may put X 1/1 counters on Crush the Blood Braided, where X is that creature's power. So he just wants creatures to die anywhere, everywhere, yours, your opponent's, sacrificed, killed in combat, board wiped, whatever, and then he will get extra counters. I would assume that you would want him to survive any kind of board wipe, so you'd want equipment that'll make him indestructible or regenerate or anything like that. But you generally want other creatures to die just so that he gets big and can later swing in for commander damage. Next is Marin of Clan Nel Toth, 4 mana, including a black and green. She is a 3/4 human shaman. Whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of your end step, choose target creature card in your graveyard. If that card's converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. So Marin is going to want a lot of your own creatures to die. She's probably going to want some self-mill or other ways to get stuff into the graveyard just so you have more options. But she definitely wants your own stuff to die, and a good way to do that would be sack outlets and the like. But one way to get to kind of recoup the loss of those creatures that you're sacrificing and to get extra value would be to use cards that draw cards as they die, so that you can get the experience counter on her, get the card into the graveyard, which you might just get right back, and draw a card so that you refill your hand a little bit. Not necessarily the route that 2,713 people are probably taking this commander in, but probably a good include maybe a couple of cards in that deck. Next is Sekuar, Deathkeeper, 5 mana, including a single black, red, and green, 4/3 Orc Shaman. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 3/1 black and red Graveborn creature token with haste onto the battlefield. So this one just wants you to have creature cards that die so that you get creature tokens that have haste and can swing in. So again, he's going to want you to have sack outlets and creatures that probably have death triggers, probably a lot of aristocrats types cards and effects, things that will also benefit you from your own creatures dying. So if you're going to benefit from your own creatures dying, you might as well have some creatures that will draw you cards as they do. It doesn't have to be the bulk of the deck of any of these decks, but those will help draw you back up a little bit and keep your engine going, your value engine, once you have it. And then last is Huatuo, Honored Physician, 3 mana, including double green, 1/2 human, and you can tap him to put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Activate this ability only during your turn before attackers are declared. There are only 37 decks with him as commander. I'm one of them. I use him as a very combo heavy deck that can do a lot of shenanigans. And basically, in my version of the deck, I want cards to either sacrifice or die, and basically just to get an engine going where I get them in the graveyard, get some sort of value, get them back on top of my library, redraw the same guys, just go in circles and circles. And so anything that can get you value on the way out is generally gonna help a strategy like that. So let's just start with the first card, which has been featured in another video, Kithkin Mourncaller, 3 mana, including a single green. He's a 2/2 Kithkin Scout. He says, whenever an attacking Kithkin or elf is put into your graveyard from play, you may draw a card. So I did feature him in the attack draw video because in order for this to work, the creature does have to be attacking when it dies. I suppose you could attack with the creature, then sacrifice it to a sack outlet, and that would still technically trigger it. It doesn't necessarily have to be blocked and killed. I still like the art to it, so I think that's kind of fun. If you can find your own tricks to make this card really effective and work, then that's what's going to make it a lot of fun. I'm not trying to say it's a great card, but with all things, I think that if you have the right synergy and you can make cards really effective, and that right there is probably a good route to take, is to attack with your creatures, and if they aren't blocked, you get the damage and then you sacrifice them during the end of combat step. If they are blocked, so what? They die and you draw a card then anyway. Next is Treeshaker Chimera, 7 mana, including double green. 8/5 Chimera. All creatures able to block it do so, and when it dies, draw 3 cards. So once again, this one was featured in the other attack video because the primary way you're going to get it to die is by attacking. You could sacrifice it, but I don't know why you'd want to. Certainly not to like an Ashnod's Altar for 2 colorless mana after spending 7 on it and having a big creature with relevant abilities, but you might do it to the Mill Altar. Can't think of what it is. The one that mills people equal to a creature's power. Maybe you would do that after a certain... once you don't feel that you can use it to the rest of its abilities, or if you're just desperate for card draw. But this one is definitely something that you're going to want to swing with most of the time, and unlike some of the other ones on this list, when he dies you draw 3 cards, which is kind of a big deal. It can definitely really help you recoup some of your losses, and it's expensive. If you're strictly using it for card draw, it's 7 mana, draw 3, so you do want to make sure that you're getting other value out of it and not just immediately cast it, kill it. Next is Bequeathal, single green mana. It's an enchantment, it's an aura. If enchanted creature is put into any graveyard, draw 2 cards. So this is kind of what I was saying at the start about how you could either try to sacrifice creatures, which nothing on this list has a sack outlet on it, but you could attach this to something that you plan on sacking, maybe to an Ashnod's Altar for 2 colorless mana, and then by attaching this first, you also draw 2 cards. Or you can just attach this to a big creature that you don't want to die, and kind of use that as incentive for your opponents to not board wipe or not kill it. And if they do, because the big creature is just too scary for them to leave around, at least you recoup some value. Not a great card, but it is something that you could probably find a little bit of value of, kind of make it work. Obviously, if you're doing an aura-based deck, here's something that you could include in that deck, for 1 green mana. It's not a terrible value, but it's not powerful either. Next is Byway Courier, 3 mana, including a single green. He's a 3/2 human scout. And when he dies, you investigate, which means that you get a clue token, pay 2, sacrifice, draw a card. So with him, you don't even directly get to just draw the card. You still have to pay 2 mana after that, which definitely makes him worse for the most part than a lot of the other creatures on this list. Now, if you have token synergies where you can, doubling season, you get 2 of those clue tokens. If you have any kind of artifact synergies, not that you would probably have like this in an Urza deck, or the same deck that would have Urza, but if you had some way to tap the artifacts for mana or for some other benefit, where you care about having just artifacts. If perhaps you had, can't think of it, the artifact that gives you 1 mana each turn equal to the number of artifacts that you have. If you have something like that and you just want an artifact on board for other artifact-based synergies, then it's not terrible. But yeah, if you want those, then you're not also caring too much about having this creature in the first place. You have other stuff to do. So there's not a whole lot of reason to justify using this creature, but you could probably have fun with it. Next is Feral Prowler, 2 mana, including a single green, 1/3 cat. When it dies, draw a card. So the fact that this one is so low on the mana curve, it's only 2 mana, it's kind of a great candidate if you're considering any kind of aristocrats type deck. Just throw this one in. It only costs 2 mana. You sack it to whatever other black card most likely will want, that will require you to sacrifice a creature as part of its cost to do something else, and then when this dies, you draw a card. Or if you have one of the altars out, you can sack it for a couple mana, which it costs a couple mana, and draw a card, so you basically just do nothing but cantrip. You have some options, and there are some ways to kind of not abuse it like infinitely, but abuse it like get a good amount of value. Next is Fecundity. It is a 3 mana, including a single green enchantment. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may draw a card. So this one's a symmetrical effect. It does benefit everybody. If you want to include it, then you need to make sure that you're going to have a deck with a good number of creatures and probably a lot of sacrifice outlets or creatures that want to die, aristocrats type stuff, etc., etc. I suppose what you could do is just have a deck full of, big stompy creatures, and then if you're worried about board wipes, put this on the table as a deterrent to that and kind of say, hey, well, if you don't kill all my stuff, I'm going to kill you and win the game. If you do kill all my stuff, I'm going to draw, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards, and I'll have a chance to rebuild to kill you later. So you could use it defensively in that regard, but most people would want this to be part of a somewhat combo-y package to, actively be part of their game plan. It's in quite a few decks, and as long as you know ahead of time that this is what you want to be doing in your deck anyway, you know what deck this will go in, or you know whether this belongs in your deck or not. Next is Filigree Familiar, 3 mana. It's a 2/2 artifact creature. It's a fox. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and when it dies, draw a card. I'm a little surprised at how much play this card sees. It's not something that I would think a lot of people would make a point of putting in their decks. The ETB gain 2 life, I don't think that that's a big enough deal to be included in any ETB deck. And then the when it dies, draw a card, that's what I would think would make it somewhat valuable in the right decks. Same as some of the other cards, it's just this one is more applicable to a non-green deck, just a mono black or black and white type deck, especially the was it Tesa, the one that cares about death triggers. So it probably does see a lot of play in those decks. But if you are also running green, if green is one of the colors that your deck has, then he is just a slightly more expensive version of what we've already seen. If you only had room for one, you should take the other one. If you have room for multiple, then he would be part of what you would want to include there. But even if you are doing something that wants to be sacking your creatures and gain a little bit of value there, the exact scenario that I've been talking about this video, it's not like you want 20 cards that do that. Probably. You probably are going more for like the Blood Artist type effect, and these are just cards that help supplement your game strategy. They're not the focal point. Next is Fruit of the First Tree, 4 mana, including a single green. This one's an enchantment aura, and when enchanted creature dies, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is its toughness. This one doesn't see a whole lot of play, and I can kind of understand that. Personally, I think I have it in my aura deck, and I just attach it to my big guy, and if I use it as a way to recoup value if it happens to be killed. What you could do is attach it to something that you do plan on sacking, like a lot of the other creatures that might be on this list, or the other deck types that are on this list, where you're sacrificing stuff for mana anyway. That way you can attach this and then guarantee that it will die. Or you could attach this to a creature that one of your opponents controls, perhaps like a Consecrated Sphinx that you know the other two opponents of yours will want to kill as soon as possible. Well, if those other opponents you know are going to try and kill it, why not have you gain value when that happens? Or if you have a way to kill a creature and this in your hand, attach this to that other creature, then kill it, and then draw a bunch of cards that way. You do have to be kind of tricky in some ways if you want to go either of those two routes. Yeah, it's more if you're the tricky play style, if that's how you want to play it. But if you just want to be more straightforward with it, I just put it on a big creature of my own, and then whenever it dies, I get benefit. Or if you're going for the sacrifice route, then put it on something that you intend on sacrificing pretty soon, and then draw extra cards as you do. Next is Gate to the Afterlife, 3 mana. It's an artifact. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life, then you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. You can also pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice this card to search your graveyard, hand, and or library for a card named God Pharaoh's Gift and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. Activate this ability only if there are 6 or more creature cards in your graveyard. Off the top of my head, I don't know what God Pharaoh's Gift is. I didn't look it up. Don't even care. The reason that this card is on this list is for the first half of it, which basically says every time one of your creatures dies, you can draw a card. You also gain a life. So if you are definitely in a deck that wants to be killing your own stuff, recurring them, doing stuff like that, then you can draw a bunch of cards. You do have to discard every time you do, but if you're in that type of deck anyway, you probably have a lot of graveyard synergies. There's probably, aside from the benefit that you get from sacrificing your own creatures or killing them, you probably have other creatures or other artifacts, enchantments, whatever, that want you to either get stuff out of your graveyard, to reanimate stuff. So you probably don't care that much about the discard in a lot of cases. Next is Lifeblood Hydra. It's 3 mana plus X. All 3 of the mana are green. It's a 0/0 Hydra. It has trample, and it enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. And when it dies, you gain life and draw cards equal to its power. So this would be the one that you Yeah, you absolutely could spend 10 mana on it, sack it to like an Ashnod's Altar, then gain 10 life and draw 10 cards. But as a big creature with trample, you probably just want to keep swinging at it, and then eventually, whenever your opponents take care of it, you benefit off of that. So yeah, he's one of the examples of a creature where you don't necessarily want it to die, but when it happens, which it probably will, because your opponents will want to deal with it. If X is big enough, if it's a big creature, your opponents will want to deal with it. When they do, you get to just refill your hand and gain a little bit of life and benefit that way. So next is Pelakka Wurm, 7 mana, including triple green. It's a 7/7 worm. It has trample. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 7 life, and when it dies, draw a card. So a 7 mana 7/7 with trample, it's big, it's relatively okay, but those aren't the kind of things that are just going to straight win you a game of Commander. Generally, you need your creatures to do other things or benefit you just in any way besides just being relatively vanilla. You can gain some life when he enters the battlefield, so if you're doing an ETB deck, you might include him in that deck. Not something where you bounce them to your hand and have to keep recasting them, but if you're doing an ETB deck where they just blink or flicker each turn, then he can gain you a bunch of life, and you can hang on to a game better that way. If you want him to, you wouldn't want to sack him just to draw 1 card because you paid 7 mana for him and he has trample and he's a relatively big body. But this is again one of those cards where if it happens to die because you're board wiped or your opponents double block it or do whatever, then you'll draw a card at least. And in the meantime, maybe you can swing with them once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, whatever, and deal a decent amount of damage and maybe kill some chump blockers along the way. So he's worth including in a deck that wants a bunch of big creatures, provided that your other big creatures have other effects that are helping out your main game plan. He would only take up 1 slot. It's not a big deal. It's not something that you should feel bad about, like he's weakening the deck. But he's not something that you should look at as being like, okay, there's my one powerhouse. Now everything else is going to be smaller and less effective than this. He should be on the kind of the least important creatures of a deck that would include him. Next is Ruined Servitor. It's a 2 mana, 2/2 artifact creature construct. When it dies, each player draws a card. So as I was kind of coming up with the different cards for this list, this one immediately I kind of looked at it and was like, okay, that could have some group hug effects, or you could get up to a few shenanigans, whatever, no big deal. Then a few minutes later, it kind of dawned on me like, oh my god, this card could actually be a huge combo piece. And considering how few decks it's in, I seriously doubt anyone has ever done this. But I was just imagining a scenario where you could just straight up win a game with this card in a very convoluted combo. And that to me would be a lot of fun. That's exciting, because certain combos, everyone's seen it to the point where they have a name and you're familiar with it, such as Flash Hulk, Mike and Trike. These are combos that are just so overdone that they're not anything special. But I seriously doubt anyone has comboed with this card to win a game. And it was just apparent to me how you would do it. All you would need is a way to keep killing it, like sacrificing it and getting it back. For me, that would be Huatuo. So, you get them you sacrifice them to some, like Ashnod's Altar or whatever, then use that commander to put them back on top of the library. Or if you have reanimate effects or something like that, ways to get artifacts back from your graveyard into play, you could do loops that way. So you just need to sacrifice them, get them back, and then you need some way to stop yourself from milling. And a few ways to do that are like Kuatuo, you just put cards from your graveyard on top of your library. There's effects like the Elixir of Immortality, which shuffles it and your graveyard into your library. And then there's things like Beacon of Creativity. I assume that's a cycle that each color has access to. It gives you a bunch of tokens and then it shuffles back into your library. There's also the Seasons Past, another sorcery. It gets you a bunch of stuff from your graveyard to your hand, and then it goes on the bottom of your library as it resolves. And then there's the Words of cycle. In green, it's Words of Wilding, which you can pay 1 mana, and instead of drawing a card the next time that you instead get a bear. Or if you have any other things that stop you from drawing, like a dredge effect, like a necropotence wouldn't do it, but a dredge effect or anything else that says like abundance, instead of drawing a card, do this instead. So if you can just repeatedly kill this thing to force everybody to draw cards infinitely, you can mill everybody else out while you still have a library with cards in it. And that, to me, makes this card pretty exciting. I know I could put it in my Huatua deck right now and pull that combo off. But, chances are by the time I get to that point, I would already have 4 or 5 other win cons on board. And be able to do everything else. But this is something that I would definitely love to see people actually use and abuse and find a way to make it good. Next is Silverback Shaman, 5 mana, including double green. It's a 5/4 ape shaman. He does have trample, and when he dies, draw a card. Again, this is something that you probably wouldn't want to sacrifice, just to get the card draw. You'd probably want to just swing out, and whenever he does happen to die, you draw a card off of it. Next is Ulvenwald Mysteries, 3 mana, including a single green. It's an enchantment, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. Investigate, again, is where you get a clue token where you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to draw a card. And it also says whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. So this one does synergize double well with a token doubler like Doubling Season, because you would get twice the token, twice the clues, and then twice the human soldier tokens as you sacrifice the clues. Again, it wants you to have a deck full of creatures that you intend on having die, so any kind of aristocrats sacrifice type deck, and then it does cost 2 mana to crack those clue tokens, but you also do get the token soldiers that can, I don't know, if you have a National Altar or Phyrexian Altar, you can sacrifice them for mana, and then that can help pay for your engine once you get it going. This card definitely has a lot of combo potential. It does seem to be getting a good amount of play, but I don't know how people are using it in those decks. Next is one of the biggest cards in the format, Skullclamp. It's a single mana. It's an artifact equipment, and it has an equip cost of 1. Equipped creature gets +1/-1, and when equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. So this one kind of is a sack outlet, but it doesn't directly say sacrifice the creature, so that's why I put it in this video and not the other one, even though realistically, if you've ever seen this card, when you attach it, you intend on that creature dying as it attaches, because it gives it -1 toughness. So this is one of the biggest cards in the format. I do think it's overrated. I do think that there should not be 61,000 and change decks that are going to like really want to keep putting their own creatures in the graveyard, the way that token decks might, aristocrat decks might. I think that a lot of those decks probably just have a decent number of small creatures, maybe mana dorks or whatever, and at a certain point in the game, they're just like, well, I don't care if I lose this thing, I'll draw 2 cards off of it. But you are losing that creature that you're letting die, and if it is like a mana dork that I just used as an example, you're now losing 1 mana and a creature that could be a blocker or attacker, depending on if you have like a overrun effect. And unless you're desperate for those 2 cards or you're going to make big use out of it, you'd be better off using any type of card draw that will allow your creatures to live and draw you cards. So unless you have specific graveyard synergy or rather death synergy where you want your creatures to die, go with the other ones that let them live and draw you cards off of it, for the most part. Next is Solemn Simulacrum. Again, a huge card in the format, even bigger than the previous one. It's 4 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature golem. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then when he dies, you may draw a card. So this one has 2 of the very best effects that you would want in a deck. It has ramp and it has card draw. That's why it's such a huge staple, and it's going to see a ton of play in white decks, red decks, blue decks, like every color, particularly ones that don't include green. But the ones that are in green that would want this are mostly the ones that care about its ETB effect, to be honest, and things that blink and flicker and abuse the ETB effect. Or if you're just running a critical mass of those similar creatures to that. The dies effect is going to be less important, generally speaking, for Solemn. If you have a way to sacrifice them, get the extra value. If not, just leave them on board and use them. Wait for someone to attack you and use them as a chump blocker. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say about it. It's a good card, and most people will want it. Next is Ulvenwald Observer. 6 mana, including double green. It's a 6/6 tree folk, and whenever a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies, draw a card. So this one specifically wants you to have a deck with big creatures. So this one is absolutely not about aristocrats or self-sacrifice. You do not want him in a deck like that. You want this just in a deck with big creatures, and your philosophy in a deck like that is, I'm going to swing out. If you try killing all my stuff, if you try board wiping, I'm still going to recover from that and come at you even harder. And this would be a card to help fit that. This would definitely be a very good include in any deck that is full of big creatures. The other ones are going to do their own huge effects, whatever you might be thinking of including, and this is just going to be one to complement and just help the other ones out immensely. Definitely worth considering in a deck full of big creatures. Not necessarily as a card draw slot, just as a utility slot. Just something else to add on. Next is Verdant Rebirth. 2 mana, including a single green. This one's an instant, and until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to its owner's hand and draw a card. So in this one, the card draw effect is just a cantrip, which for the most part I'm not going to be including in this series. Instants and sorceries that just draw you a card in addition to whatever effect it has. But with this one, I did want to kind of single it out and include it because the creature that you target, when it dies, it goes back to your hand. So it's like you get that card back. It's almost like you drew that card but out of your graveyard instead of your library, in addition to the card that you will be drawing off the top of your library. So it's a great way, sometimes you're going to have ways to protect your creature, to basically give it indestructible till end of turn, or save it in that regard so that it doesn't die. This one, the creature will still die, but you'll at least be able to return it to your hand so you can play it again. So it's not as great as if you could keep the creature on board, but it will still generally benefit you a decent amount if you actually care about protecting your creatures. So it's something that is probably worth considering in more decks, and yeah, it's worth considering. Give it a try. So that's it for this episode.